It's difficult to get very specific figures and accurate figures, but it's well understood that there's more than 650,000 active businesses in the UAE. And Dubai Chambers last year, which deals with all Dubai Mainland companies and any trading company that wants to register with them, they reported a year-on-year increase of 42.9%. So a 42.9% increase from 2022 to 2023.
How to register a business in the UAE, especially focused on e-commerce sellers and Amazon sellers. This is one of the most basic, most requested questions from you guys anywhere, right here on YouTube, anywhere you see me, you ask me how to register a business. And that's why today's episode of E-commerce Connections by the Amazon Sellers Society is going to answer just that. Hi, Gary.
Hi, how are you doing, Crystal?
Very good. Thank you so much for coming. Gary, you are part of the Virtuzone team. Tell us a little bit more about you and a little bit more about Virtuzone as well.
Yeah, so I'm Gary Thompson. I'm the commercial director at Virtuzone. I've been with the Virtuzone since moving to the UAE almost 7 years ago.
Yeah.
My primary role is overseeing the new sales department that deal with new inquiries, new company incorporations, people who want to set up e-commerce businesses or people that want to set up any businesses. And with Virtuzone, we can cater from everyday entrepreneurs to large multinational companies, depending on what's required. By background, I'm a lawyer. So I practiced in the UK for more than 10 years before moving to the UAE to do something a little bit different. And if there's any sort of specialist or complicated cases, they'll usually find their way to me. But we've got a very large team. We're the largest corporate service provider in the UAE. And we don't only focus on setting up your company. That's just the beginning. We can also help you with banking, corporate services, accounting, compliance, all those additional needs that you require after your license is actually issued.
Perfect. Gary, let's talk about registering businesses right here in the UAE. Obviously, we're going to go into it because this is going to be a step-by-step guide and tutorial for anyone that is looking for this type of information. Because a lot of people tell us this information is not out there. There you go. We're creating it for you. But Gary, give us a little bit more of an insight into how many businesses are currently registered in the UAE. Have we seen any growth? The country is seeing an explosive growth, but what about registering businesses?
Yes, so in our own personal experience, we've noticed a boom, a very significant boom actually over the last 3 years. It's difficult to get very specific figures and accurate figures, but it's well understood that there's more than 650,000 active businesses in the UAE. And Dubai Chambers last year, which deals with all Dubai Mainland companies and any trading company that wants to register with them, they reported a year-on-year increase of 42.9%. So a 42.9% increase from 2022 to 2023. And putting that into numerical terms, it was 48,616 businesses registered with Dubai Chambers in 2023 versus 34,029 in 2022.
That's incredible. Now that's an incredible number. So, which gets me excited because I think a lot of people think that it's such a difficult process to register a business in the UAE, but we're going to break it down.
Exactly.
But what we decided is, obviously, when somebody is looking at registering a business in the UAE, they primarily have to make the main decision as to if they want to register a Freezone business or a Mainland business. So walk us through the differences.
Yeah, so it can be easy to set up a company, but if you do it correctly,
yes,
and
certainly,
you know what you're doing, like anyone could go and set up a Freezone company and choose a jurisdiction at random, set the company up. But if you make a mistake at that very beginning stage as to what's going to be required for your business growth in the future, then it can be very, very costly. And that's what can make it complicated, and that's what can make it difficult. Now, in the UAE, there are 3 main types of jurisdiction. There are Freezone, there are Mainland, and there are holding companies. Now, generally the main choice at the beginning of your journey is a Freezone versus a Mainland. So Freezone is what people are most familiar with. Freezone is like a state in America. There's over 50 different free zones. They're governed by the federal law of the UAE, but they have their own devolved power for certain things. And the difficulty is that every free zone has different pricing, different packages, different procedures. Everyone doesn't follow the same process. So what you would do in DMCC is very, very different to what you would do in Raquez and Ras Al Khaimah. So it's actually knowing how to navigate all of those processes. And some jurisdictions ask for a lot more documentation than others. Some are very, very well suited to certain activities than others. And there's also certain activities where you must, for example, take a specific jurisdiction. So a good example of that is if you want to do real estate brokerage in Dubai, you must start with a Dubai mainland company so that you can get RERA approval, which is the Real Estate Regulatory Authority. And in the past, it used to be a case of each jurisdiction would be themed. So we're currently recording in Media City. So Media City is a free zone that was aimed at media companies. There's Studio City, there's Industrial City, there's
Internet City.
Yes, exactly. There's all these different free zones, but over time we're moving away from that. So those free zones are becoming like small businesses that are fighting for the same business. Essentially, we're moving away from it being strictly segmented. But if you are a media company and you want to be next to your peers, then Media City would be an obvious choice, although it might be much more expensive than other options that are available. And then Mainland is what's deemed the kind of premium company. Mainland is where you can do business anywhere in the Emirate where you set the company up. So if it's a Dubai company in Mainland, you can do business anywhere in Dubai. You can do business outside the UAE. You can grow to have an unlimited number of employees subject to your office space and Ministry of Labour approval. You have a lot of flexibility in what you can do with the licence. And traditionally, Mainland is where you would need to have a local partner that would own 51% of the business. But a few years ago, that changed. And now for pretty much every business in the Mainland, you can own it 100% as a foreign national. And Freezone is restricted. So with the Freezone, you're only supposed to operate inside the Freezone itself or outside the UAE. But there are some workarounds and there are some ways that you can use a Freezone to your advantage. And eCommerce is a perfect example of that. So with eCommerce, you can have an eCommerce company that's in a Freezone. You can have your website, you can have your operations, you can have everything running remotely from the Freezone. Then the physical delivery of your goods will be dealt with by a distributor or a 3PL logistics warehouse, where they will actually take the goods that have been imported into the free zone, export them to the Mainland and deliver them to the end customer.
Exactly. And you can sell them on platforms like Amazon as an example.
Exactly, yeah. Amazon, as I understand it, of course you're the expert in that element, but Amazon is your all-in-one. It's like what we would say we are for company formation.
Exactly.
You get your goods, you store them with Amazon. Amazon ship them. They do everything for you, but they charge a heavy fee. We like to think we don't charge such a heavy fee, but you're paying for our expertise. Because making a mistake at the beginning to save money can cost you a lot later, and that's actually the biggest mistake I see in the industry. Everyone has an opinion on where you should set your company up, and 90% of the time it's the wrong opinion. Because if you see a post on a Facebook group or you see something on social media, it's one of the most responded to questions that anyone ever posts. Just because you've had good experience with one particular free zone doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the suitable free zone for everyone else. And when you speak to the free zones directly, they can only sell one product. They can't say, okay, well, Media City is actually better than Ras Al Khaimah, or DMCC is better than Mainland. They can only push one product. Whereas what we do is we like to take a holistic approach of all the options that are available and give you something that's going to suit you today, but also later. And one of the most common questions I see is,
What's
the best and the cheapest option.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, they never go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Like in everyday life, would you go to the shops and pay the least amount for the best product?
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't. So it's finding that middle ground.
Yeah.
Because changing from one company to another is a huge headache in the future. So it's not easy to change from Freezone to Mainland. It's not easy to change from Dubai to Ras Al Khaimah, or even within Dubai, it's not easy.
Yeah.
So it's better to start with something that's going to suit you now and in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, rather than something that might only suit your business for 2 years.
That's perfect what you just said, Gary, because as you know, most in our case, Amazon sellers, when they want to set up their business, their main question is, so which Freezone should I choose? And normally if it's another seller giving them that information, it's based on their personal experience. Yes. Like if they registered with Maidan, for example, and they had a good experience, they would say, oh, go to Maidan or X or Y or Z. So normally when somebody comes to an expert like you guys at Virtuzone, you don't just look at, okay, you want to become an Amazon seller today. Like you just said, you look at what somebody would like to do 2 to 3 years down the line. However, to answer that question, is there a certain Freezone that somebody should go to? What would be the selection based on?
So there's a number of factors that you really should consider. So first of all, how many visas do you think you will require? So some Freezones are good if you only need 2 or 3 visas.
Yeah.
Some are really bad if you need 4 or 5, because you then need to go from having a flexi desk to having a very, very expensive office. And what I like to say with Freezones are generally they're cheaper at the beginning, but as you scale, they become disproportionately more expensive.
Okay.
Whereas Mainland at the beginning is more expensive, but as you scale, it becomes more economic. So what we like to do is we like to look at how many employees you're likely to have in the first couple of years and where you want to aspire to grow to. Do you actually need an office space? So are you going to have all your employees work from home, or do you like to have an environment where everyone's in one place? And can a particular Freezone give you the space to do what you want to do? Because you're only allowed to have an office where your jurisdiction is. So if you have a DMCC Freezone company, you can have a DMCC office. You can't have a Mainland office. Yeah. If you have a Mainland company, you can have a Mainland office, but you can't have a DMCC office. Yeah. So where you actually set up, it's not just about price, it's not just about what your activity is, it's also about your office space, your growth, your logistics, your partners. There's a lot of different things that you need to consider. Also, it's appropriate where you're doing your business. So if you're doing your business inside JAFSA, for example, then it might make sense to be in JAFSA, because you're next to where you want to deliver, you're doing Freezone to Freezone, you don't want to worry about exporting, transporting, blah, 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 blah. So that's another important consideration. Nationality can be a consideration as well, because there's, whether we like it or whether we don't, in the UAE there are some nationalities that are considered to be extremely high risk. And if you have a high risk nationality and you're in a very cost effective Freezone, then your chances of getting a bank account, for example, are very, very low. So nationality's also a factor. And also your business aspirations, like, do you want to promote yourself as a premium business? Is it important to say that you're in Dubai for your customers? Are you selling outside the UAE, and do you want to promote yourself as Dubai? Because everyone's heard of Dubai, whereas if you're not in the UAE, you might not necessarily have heard of Sharjah. You might not necessarily have heard of Ras Al Khaimah. So unfortunately, there isn't a kind of guide or one size fits all.
But that's good. Those are a lot of points that somebody needs to consider. Obviously, price is one of those things, but you need to also consider all of those things. Now, let's talk about timelines. So for somebody that wants to register, let's start off with a Mainland company. What sort of timeline are we looking at, and what sort of documentation or details would somebody require to have in order to register? Okay,
so first of all, I'll give you a kind of step-by-step of the steps in the process for Mainland. And then we'll talk about sort of general timelines.
Sure.
So for Mainland, the first step is to identify a trade name. Once you have your trade name, you then move on to initial approval. And initial approval can be granted within an hour or two for most nationalities. For some nationalities, it goes for a separate security check, and it takes a bit longer. Once you have initial approval, you can then issue your office lease. So for mainland companies, generally you need an office lease. So whether that be a virtual office, whether it be a business centre, whether it be a fixed office, once the office lease is issued, you get the Ajari, which is the official tenancy contract. And once you have the Ajari, you can then proceed to sign the Memorandum of Association, which is the documentation to set the company up, and the license can be issued. So if we look at those steps, that's the licensing process in a nutshell. And the licensing process realistically can be done in between 2 and 5 working days.
That's perfect.
Just depending on how quickly you give feedback on the name and if you have a nationality or if there's a delay in getting your Ajari. All of that can affect the timeline. But if everything goes smoothly, it can be done in 2 to 5 working days.
That's great.
Yeah. So after you have your license, it's not a case of going straight to the bank account. And that's where a lot of people make a mistake. So a lot of people think, I've got a license, I can get a bank account. That's not the case. You have to have a visa first.
At least it's not the case in the UAE.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the UAE, you must have a visa first because of the central bank regulations.
Yeah.
So if you already have a visa, you're sponsored by someone, and this is something you're setting up in addition to that, then great, you can go straight to a bank account. But if you're new to the UAE or if you've just cancelled your existing visa, you have to then process a new visa so that you can then interact with the bank. So what we do is we open the immigration file, which allows you to process partner visas, which are often referred to as investor visas. And we also open the the labour file, and the labour file is what allows you to process employment visas. That the process of opening the files, the immigration file takes about 1 day, so you can move straight into processing a partner or an investor visa immediately. And then the labour file takes about 3 to 5 working days to open up, and includes an inspection of your office. So the Ministry of Labour will come in and see the office and give you an initial quota, normally of about 3 for employees. From license issuance to processing a partner visa, that can be done in about 5 to 7 working days. From license issuance to processing an employment visa, you have to wait until someone has a Emirates ID first. Only when someone has an Emirates ID can they open the labour file.
Oh, a labour file. Okay.
And also the bank account. So once you've got your visa, you go to bank account. Once you've got your bank account, you then need to think about your compliance as well as your operations. So you need to do accounting, you need to do corporation tax, you need to think about VAT. So there's all these different considerations that 5, 6, 7 years ago weren't prevalent in the UAE. But now we're becoming more like Europe, we're becoming more like other countries where there is compliance, there is requirements, and you need someone to guide you to stay on top of all of that. Because ultimately, if you have a good business idea, you have a good business process, you want to focus on that rather than the headache, the paperwork, the running back and forward, the making the mistakes. That's why you would instruct someone like us to assist.
Yeah. Circling back to Freezone, let's talk about the particular timeline for registering a Freezone company, and process of getting a partner visa and getting an Emirates ID is probably the same. But what type of timeline are we looking at for Freezones?
Yeah, so with Freezones, there's more than 50 of them.
Yeah.
So each one has its own timeline.
Yeah.
But broadly speaking, it can be done from 1 working day to 3 or 4 weeks, depending on the jurisdiction that you set up in. So broadly speaking, it follows a very similar process, although it will be called something slightly different. You need to identify your name, you need to get an approval, you then need to sign the documents, you then need to get the license issued. So ultimately, when you do that then gives you the company license. And again, we go back to, do we process visas? And with a Freezone company, the immigration file and the labour file are essentially opened in the name of the Freezone rather than opened under your name personally. So it's not as important to have an Emirates ID and various other things inside the Freezone. So processing visas in the Freezone is generally a little bit more convenient.
And a little bit faster, would you say? Yeah.
It can be. Some Freezones, no. But yes, it can be faster.
Yeah. The important thing is I meet a lot of people that have been living in the UAE for a very long time, as employed, and then when they decide to switch maybe, or have a side business, or to switch and have their own business, generally they're not aware that they can get themselves a partner visa and get an Emirates ID and be able to live here without having a job or a sponsor in this case. So which is great. So for small businesses who are looking to set up here, obviously if you have a residency, it doesn't mean, or an Emirates ID, sorry, it doesn't mean that you have to live here full time, but you have that process, you have that option very much similar to somebody that is fully employed here, right?
Yes, and every few months there's more and more options available to people to get a visa. So you can get a partner or an investor visa if you're an investor in a company. You can also get an investor visa if you have property, if you have various other investments in the UAE. If the investments are of a large enough scale, you can also get a golden visa, which is a 10-year visa. And the unique thing about the golden visa is that there's no entry and exit requirements. So normal visas, generally you're supposed to come once every 180 days. Unofficially, if you have an investor visa or a partner visa, you can often stretch that to 1 year. But for employment visas, you can't. It will invalidate. And there's now a re-entry process that's available if you go out with that 180 days. So having a company will generally make it possible for you to have visas as long as you take a package that gives you a visa quota. And then the final option is you can also be sponsored by one of your family members.
Correct.
And we have a package available now, for example, which we're calling the Silver Visa package. That includes a 5-year license. You start by getting a normal visa, and then after 6 months you switch to a 5-year visa, because a lot of people now are very interested in the longer term visas, and it also poses a sort of interesting question for inheritance tax and your place of domicile for the UK. So the legal side in me is a little bit interested to see how that pans out.
So we're going to definitely talk about the packages that currently Virtuzone is offering. But just to cap off everything, it is very, very simple nowadays to register a business in the UAE. Simple, not documentation wise, but I'm saying timeline wise, it's absolutely amazing how quickly you can register a business. So you shouldn't feel like anyone that's watching the episode shouldn't feel scared or worried about it. You know, a lot of almost 40,000 businesses are registering every year. So it's something that's been done, and you can reach out to the experts, of course, so that you can get more information. Before we get into the packages and how Virtuzone can help, what last thing should somebody consider? Because we talked about VAT, we talked about a little bit of tax compliance and stuff, but that's something that's very new. Can we talk a little bit more about it just briefly so people understand that this is something that they need to look at as well?
Yeah, sure. So corporation tax was introduced for the first time in the UAE from the 1st of June 2023.
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately. So that's kind of the hot topic at the moment. And actually a few days ago, the Federal Tax Authority issued guidance that there's going to be fines if you don't register quickly enough for your corporation tax. So if your license is issued in January or February, you've got to register before the 31st of May. If your license is March, April, you've got to register before the end of June, and it goes on.
We'll put it somewhere on the screen so people can follow it.
And there's a fine for not complying, which is 10,000 dirhams. So they don't mess around with the fines.
This is new. Taxes is new, so they have to, I think, put these fines, or people are going to be like, no, it doesn't apply to me.
Exactly. And a lot of people have common misconceptions about corporation tax. So with corporation tax, every company must register. It doesn't matter if it's only for visas. It doesn't matter if you've had zero revenue. Every company must register. And the registration process, we can deal with it for you, or your accountant can deal with it. It's relatively straightforward. And once you've registered, you've then got to file accounts within a certain period of your first financial year ending. So corporation tax, it's not bad compared to other countries. The rate is 9% on profit over $100,000. There's also some reliefs and there's some exemptions that are available. So there's something called small business relief. Which could mean you could be exempt up until 2027 if your turnover is less than 3 million dirhams every year. But although you're exempt, you've got to show that you're exempt. So you've still got to keep accounts, you've still got to file accounts, you've still got to apply for the exemption. So you can't just assume that you'll get it. You have to show the Federal Tax Authority that you qualify. There's also what's called a Freezone exemption. Everyone had understood that if you were in a free zone and you were only doing business outside the UAE and you were only not doing business with the mainland, for example, you would be exempt. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So there are a very, very limited number of exemptions that could be available. But if we use e-commerce as an example, any business that does, any company that does business with consumers cannot qualify for the exemption. So if your end customer is an individual person, you can't qualify for any exemption. So all the exemptions are limited to business to business. Now, if, for example, you were a large drop shipping company that dealt business to business only, and you were buying from China and you were selling to the UK, there is an exemption that's available for that, but you have to be in a special free zone, which is called a designated zone. So a designated zone is a free zone that's essentially got custom controls. So parts of Ras Al Khaimah is a designated zone. Jafsa is a good example of a designated zone. Dubai Airport Free Zone is a designated zone. So for that specific example, you could potentially have a tax exemption. But if you're doing business inside the UAE, more than 5% of your business is inside the UAE, then you wouldn't qualify for that exemption. So it's very important that you have these things and consider these things at the outset so that they don't come as a shock or cause you problems later. VAT has been in place for a long time now.
Since 2015, I think, And people also were very disrupted.
Scared about it. The funny story I remember about that is I went into the Palace Hotel one day and bought a Diet Coke or a Coke, and it was 23 dirhams. I went the next day and it was 42. And I asked why the price had increased so much, and they said it was because of the VAT.
You're like, what? It's 5%?
It's 5%, but I think what they were doing is they were adding 5% onto every single person that had touched it. So by the time we got it, it had almost doubled. But VAT is 5%. It's a consumer tax, which means that ultimately the person that consumes the goods pays the tax. Businesses don't pay the 5%. Their job is to collect the 5% and then pay it to the government. And if they have any outlays, like if they buy a computer or they buy business items, then they can also offset the 5% that they've paid against the VAT that they pay back to the government. In addition to that, there's also now ultimate beneficial owner requirements. So you have to declare any changes, or you have to update who the owner of each company is, so that there's transparency. So if you're holding company on behalf of someone else, you're supposed to declare that actually I'm not the beneficial owner, this person's the beneficial owner. There's also economic substance regulations now. This applies to certain types of businesses like real estate, like us, for example. So if you're taking other people's money and doing something with it, generally you will fall under the economic substance or the anti-money laundering regulations. There's also, as I alluded to, anti-money laundering regulations. So certain types of businesses have to put certain procedures and processes in place, have an anti-money laundering officer, etc. in place. So there's all these kind of things that for a European or for someone from the US, etc., is just normal.
It's normal,
that has now been introduced into the UAE and it's now being enforced. And the days where you would get fines and you would just ignore them and nothing would really happen are gone, because they're now being enforced. So if you get a fine from the Federal Tax Authority and you don't pay it, you can't submit your VAT return, which will then get you another fine. So the systems are getting smart. Everything's been regulated, but it's not all bad, because it means now
just follow the rule. Just follow the system.
Just follow the rules in the system. And it's not all bad, because we're now off the grey list in terms of banking, and that's largely why all of these measures were put in place. And in terms of local banking, it's never actually been easier in the UAE. So banking was always a pain point in the past. But there's a new solution, or there's new digital solutions where you can get a bank account within 3 to 5 working days, whereas traditional accounts historically would take minimum 20 to 25 working days. So there was always that period where you you had the company but you couldn't do business.
Yes.
Now that's been fixed.
Yes, yes. So there's a reason why there's not a lot of concrete information out there. First of all, it keeps changing because there's like a lot of updates. Second of all, there's just so much details to understand, and that's why somebody who is interested to register a business should reach out to Virtuzone, because you guys, this is what you do day in and day out. So you have all of this knowledge and information. So let's talk a little bit. Obviously, you always have great packages and great offers, but let's talk about the offers that Virtuzone currently has now. And, you know, if somebody's watching this video right now, they'll be able to make the most of these packages, or you could just reach out to Virtuzone and see if there's any updated packages for you. So what type of package? I know we talked about something related to a silver visa, which I thought was really cool. But what type of packages are you offering right now?
Yeah, so just to give you examples of packages, and I will caveat it by saying that these can change. So we're just about to do some packages for Ramadan, which I can talk about. So the silver visa package is proven very, very popular because people want a longer term visa. So a silver visa package, it's 59,995 dirhams plus VAT. I know that might sound a lot at the outset, but that includes a 5-year license. It includes your normal visa. And it also includes switching you to the 5-year visa. So if you break it down, it's 12,000 dirhams a year. It's not really that bad. In addition to that, you also need to separately do your compliance, whether you do that yourself or you do it through us. That's available for you. There's another package that we're just about to launch for Ramadan, which is going to be called the all-in-one package. For 24,995 plus VAT. That will include your license, it'll include your visa, it'll include accounting for up to 10 transactions per month, corporation tax registration, VAT registration, VAT filing, economic substance regulations and AML assessments, so bank account opening, so everything essentially that you would need to get you off the ground up and running and stay compliant, all in one package, clear, transparent at the outset. That's really what we're trying to cater for, because what a lot of people here do is they give you the smallest possible price. So you'll see multiple.
Can hook you in. They can hook you in,
You'll see multiple adverts about get your license for 5,700, get your license for 6,000. But when you actually drill down to what you need versus what's being advertised, the price is very, very different. So we always try and be transparent at the outset so that you don't get any surprises later. Because ultimately, for you to really do your budget, really do your forecasting, you have to know realistically what it's going to cost. Because if there's lots of hidden fees and hidden costs that you've not accounted for, then it'll put you into jeopardy.
Perfect. Gary, before we're done, I know we alluded to this, but we didn't really focus on it. The cool thing about having, especially in our field in e-commerce, the cool thing about having a business license in the UAE, whether that be Freezone or Mainland, is that you can actually utilize that same license. Well, for Amazon, you can use it on all of Amazon's marketplaces. So for you as, you know, the Virtuzone team, have you seen a lot of people want to register here in the UAE, their business, in order to use it in, not necessarily in the UAE? And why would that be the case? Like, why would somebody choose the UAE to register their business versus, I don't know, the UK or anywhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge demand for people that want to register their business here and offer services elsewhere. Now, the main advantage for most people is the tax benefits. So if you are going to move from the UK to the UAE, you're going to stop becoming a UK tax resident. You're going to become a UAE tax resident. You're going to live here. You're going to spend the necessary amount of time here, and you don't spend too much time in the UK. Then you don't have income tax, which in the UK can be 50-55%, depending on how much you're making. Corporation tax is 9% here versus I think 25% in the UK. So what you actually take home is considerably higher. So the tax advantages are massive. Also the kind of flexibility to deal with different parts of the world. So you can hire good labour here, well qualified labour here. You can really grow and develop your business. Lots of people want to be in Dubai, whereas some people don't like going to cold climates or they don't want to go to other countries. So
understandable.
You really have that pull. And the flexibility with e-commerce as an example, it means that you can service different countries without paying the high price and tax, corporation tax, etc., that you would normally do if you have to set up a separate company in those countries. Like, one of the most common things are people set up companies here so to do business with Saudi, for example.
Yes.
Because there's the rates are lower.
Yeah.
It's much easier to set up in Dubai than it is in Saudi. Saudi is a very, very difficult process. So
especially for expats like us. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So doing it in the UAE and being able to service the Saudi market is great, especially for trading. Like in trading, I think you've got to pay a 25 million real deposit to do trading. So that's, for most people, that's just impossible. Whereas you can service that market from the UAE, so it's very much it's a big portion of our business. For the exact percentage, I don't know,
but it's big.
But it's big, yeah.
Perfect. So guys, now you have all of the information. Well, most of the information, as much as we were able to provide you. Next step would be to reach out to Gary and the Virtuzone team to learn a little bit more about how you can set up your own business right here in the UAE, so that you can hopefully become an Amazon seller, or you can do whatever you want. Gary, last words.
Thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure. And feel free to reach out to myself or my team at any point. And we work quite hand in hand with Christo and our team at the Amazon Seller Society, so that we can give you a sort of all-in-one package to get you up and running, to get the business making money, because ultimately that's what you want to focus on.